All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Gemma Zoe Smith, and I am going to be speaking this afternoon, evening. Feels like evening, doesn't it? I'm going to be speaking this evening all about interviews for independent schools. So if you are watching me and you can see me and I am here, please let me know. Right? Give me a little comment. Tell me what schools you're applying for. Give me a hi. Just let me know that you are there. I'm also going to check my second screen just to make sure that I am live and that everybody can see me before I start presenting. So I'm going to be about 1 minute and then I will begin. So let me know who you are. Let me know that you're working, that this is working, that you can see me. And as I said, we will get started as soon as possible. I think I can see that I am live. I think I can see that I am joined by people. So hello if that is you. and I know that there are some people who I've spoken to who will be joining and watching this a little bit later on. I am going to get the Bake Off. So I watch the Bake Off quite religiously, and that is the reason that I've scheduled this to be a little bit earlier than my usual lives, because I really want to go and see the Bake Off. So do let me know that you're watching this, as I said, because I would really love to know who you are. I'd really love to know any questions that you've got about independent school interviews. Stick them in the comments. And I will get through them. I can see them as I am speaking to you right now. So you should be able to let me know. Okay. So hopefully everybody can hear me. Please let me know if you can't hear me, because that'll be hard. And we will be good to go. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and grab some headphones. I will be back and we will begin. All right. Oh, that's a little bit better. Okie dokes. Right, let's make sure that we are good. And hopefully, can you give me a thumbs up that you can hear me? Usually it automatically goes round, but we'll see. Let's have a look. Default external. That should be fine. And default external. Brilliant. Okay, so we should be ready to go. Perfect. And everyone should be able to hear me. So I'm going to be speaking for about half an hour this evening, and I am going to go through things such as how to prepare for interviews at home, how you can start to tackle that process, that preparation process, and the how, the why, and the common pitfalls that you might need to watch out for if your child is doing an interview. So without further ado, let's begin. So hopefully some of you who are here, who are joining me, know who I am. My name is Gemma Zoe Smith, and I pop on to the 11 Plus journey. Saba very kindly lets me come on and share some experience and share some wisdom with parents. And at this point, I want to say thank you for letting me do this. The 11 Plus journey is a really supportive place. And it's one of the first 11 plus groups that I came across. And I hope that you do find it a supportive place here, and do feel free to ask questions, as I said, either throughout this, if you're watching afterwards, so that we can support you, so that I can support you and answer those questions for you. I've tutored myself for the last 10 years. And I, especially around this time, I do a lot of interview prep. So I go into schools and I run interview masterclasses for them. And I've got a couple that are booked end of October, start of November as well. I go and I do a version of interview masterclasses online with my pupils, and I come on and I do events like this to help you guys out as well. So everything at this point for me becomes interview based. And I know that for lots of you who are watching this, you might be watching it back in December because you're preparing for a January interview. But I tend to do these a little bit earlier because I know that there are some people who are doing interviews earlier, and some of our preparation is a bit earlier as well. So I think when you're thinking about interviews and you're thinking about the preparation and the pitfalls, you need to know why. Why does a school interview in the first place? And there's lots of different reasons, but especially if you're looking at a boarding school, then they're very much going to be looking at how does your child interact with others? Are they going to work well in a boarding house? Do they have a wide variety of interests? Because that's going to ensure that they will be able to do lots of things when they're there. If you're looking for an independent day school, they might be looking at, what are your child's hobbies, and will they fit with the school? Because some schools are very sporty, some schools are much more arts based. So is that something that your child has chosen that school based on its facilities or based on its particular clubs, based on maybe it has a competitive rowing, competitive canoeing club, and that would be something that makes it unique. There are often academic interviews. And at that point, you're wanting to see, is a child similar to what you've got as a written exam? So an independent school may well do an exam and an interview, and they're wanting to see if that's the same child. So does the same child answer something when they are being asked questions verbally compared to when they have to write that down? They want to see an example of maybe what's it like if everything doesn't go to plan. So are you a child, or do you have a child, if you're a parent who's watching this, do you have a child who is able to bounce back, who is able to deal with being upset, deal with something not going to plan? Because maybe that is something that they really value. And so the first thing that I would always say to stop yourself going and maybe falling down some of those rabbit holes, look at the school. Always start with the school and start to look at what type of child do they want? What are they pushing on their website? Are they pushing getting involved with charity? Are they pushing the sport? Are they pushing an all-round child, an academic child? What is it that they're looking for? And from there, you can start to see, okay, maybe these are the types of questions that might come up. So if they're particularly a sporty school, you're looking at a couple of schools that are really day and boarding. There are some that are really sports based. Then you might be thinking, okay, well, what can we do to highlight those sports experiences? If you are looking at schools where academics is very much the forefront, and that's what they're writing about in their news bulletins, in their blogs, on their Instagram, everywhere they're talking about results, then you know the type of child that they're more likely to be looking for. So start with the website. Start with the website, and that is going to help you to be able to see really what do you need to maybe think about. Now, obviously, there's some common questions as well, but I always find that the website's a good place to go first of all. Now, I know this is 11 plus journey, but there will be some of you hiding in here, and I know you do exist because I've seen you before. Some of you might be taking 7 plus, 8 plus, 10 plus, 13 plus, 16 plus. So you might have children going for different interviews. And interestingly, I do this for lots of different ages. And I would say a lot of the interview skills and the interview practice stuff that I'm saying this evening is actually fairly similar. They're not going to have the exact same answers. A 7-year-old does not have the same answer as a 13-year-old, does not have the same answer as a 16-year-old. But some of the common questions, why do you want to go to this school? Why is it that you want to apply here? What subjects do you enjoy most in school? Tell me what you do on a weekend. All of those are your typical school questions. And I can drop a link in here to some interview questions so that you can sign up to that afterwards as well for free. And keep an eye out, because it's worth having them to have a bit of a practice. But what we're not looking for when somebody asks those general questions is a really rehearsed answer. So I think it's important to consider those questions and to consider the different levels of answer. As I said, an 11-year-old is going to have maybe different priorities to a 16-year-old when they're choosing school. 16 may well be more focused on university and what the specialist teaching can offer within their A-level or IB subjects. An 11-year-old is more interested in maybe the clubs or the hobbies or the size of the science labs or the facilities that the school has to offer. But they're the same question, and they're worth considering. They're worth talking over conversationally as a family. And I always say to my students, have that chat. Don't sit down and write down the answers word for word. And for my students in the masterclass, I give them a big booklet, and it's there to put your ideas down. It's not there to write your answer, because if you have to memorize all those answers, then you sound not like yourself. And so I think that's a big thing. Like, start to have those conversations, start to have them nice and early. I think over the 10 years that I've done interview prep, and particularly over the last 4 years, which I've done going into schools and I've done running masterclasses, I think I've reckoned there's about 12 different types of interview questions that I've come across. Not all of them are used in every single interview. And often there's only a few that are used in very short interviews, but there are lots of different types to consider. So you've got like a general, which are your more kind of general, all about you questions, I would consider. So these often are used at the start of an interview, especially if it's one-to-one and it's designed to make a child feel more relaxed. So how did you get here today? Tell me about your family. Very open, tell me about yourself type questions. You've got some that are like hobby questions. So those are, what do you do after school? Do you do any sport? What about charities? What about volunteering? What about arts? And don't worry if you don't match all of these. So often there's a point where people say, oh, I don't do any charity, or I don't do any volunteering. What I would say is that it's about being able to answer those questions and suggest the reasons why. So when we do the masterclass, we work on a way to deal with tricky questions. And I'll go through a similar version today. So if somebody asks a question for your child that they do not have an answer for, so do you contribute to charity, or do you do any charitable work? It's very specific, but I know it's asked by a couple of schools, and they don't have anything to say. Then what I would be saying is, okay, we'll be upfront about it. I currently don't do any charity work. And then you want a however, because, but part in the middle. But I do swimming 3 times a week, or I do compete for my county, and I find that doesn't give me a lot of time. Or my school does some charity events that I take part in. So although I don't do anything outside of school, I don't do anything outside of school for charity. However, my school fundraises for this particular charity every year, and we do this event, that event, this event. So you're dealing with it and you are providing an additional. So there's certain different types of categories, and those categories can be practice, they can be conversational, and remember, you're taking from the website to see where is it that the school may be looking for in terms of the type of student they're looking for. What does my child need to be like? And I love this bit, because lots of children who come to me when they're doing a mock interview, they do not sound like children. And that is fine if your child naturally does not. So if your child naturally uses words like verbose and completely gone blank. They're verbose. So if they use indeterminately, there we are. So if they use unusual vernacular, they use unusual words, and that is them, do not change them. But they don't need to. And it's not something that they are looking for a student who is using overly verbose vocabulary. They don't need to sound like they're writing. So you don't need to explain to me, and I have had a student do this before, they described everything as though it was a creative writing piece. You do not need to do that. You don't need to describe to me how the leaves felt as you walked towards hockey practice. You need to tell me that you do hockey practice. So don't overflower the language, but instead focus on the content. But there is worth being aware. They do need to be used to speaking with adults. They do need to be polite. They do need to be well-mannered. They don't need to go, what? Whenever they're asked a question. And I'm sure that your children will not do that. But just be aware that obviously there is a certain amount of a certain amount of behavior, but it does not mean that you need to be over the top. It does not mean that you need to be really verbose or anything like that. So some of you may be joining me, and you might have a couple of months for interviews. And if you do, then start early, especially if your child is shy, especially if it's not their first language isn't English, and practice by speaking to lots and lots of people. And that's all I would say is worth doing right at the start. You know, it might be that you practice by having those conversations. So every time somebody asks, "Oh, how's your day been?" then try and push your child to answer those questions. Try and push them to tell them about what's happening in school, and really kind of make sure that they have that practice speaking to adults. Speak at home. Open up that time that may have been used for exam practice. I know if you're independent, it's probably there's still some exam practice going on. But tell stories, sit around the dinner table, bring out achievements. So if you keep a little box, my mum kept a little box file of all of the stuff I'd done, everything from gymnastic badges, which I was not good at, up to dance, up to swimming. And I think it's useful to take those out and remind a child. So, remember when we did this, or bring a photo, remember when we went on that holiday, remember when you had that falling out with a friend and how you solved it. Remember how, and always just have that conversation, and think about having school conversation together. So why are we applying to this school? What's really important for you? What's really important for me? And how would you answer this question? If you were asked to describe the time that you led a team, how would you describe it? How would I describe it? Have that as a conversational piece, and converse both at home in terms of talking around the topics, but also speaking to unusual adults. So making sure that they've got that opportunity. If you've got interviews and you are looking at preparing them ahead of time, and I know that there are some people who are, because you've been in touch with me and you've booked either a masterclass really early, or you've spoken to me about what's happening this evening. If you are wanting to prepare early because you know that your child and yourself as a family, you want to get that interview piece done, and you want to then just keep up with it at home, or if you're doing it a few weeks before, then you're starting to practice things. So practice some questions, but not over and over again, because you'll sound robotic. Your child will sound like they have rehearsed an answer. Try and find somebody who is not so familiar. And sometimes people do this in parent swaps. So they will do a practice interview for somebody else's child, and someone else will do a practice interview for their child. And I think that's a really great method. Obviously, you can get practice interviews with someone like myself, but you can also do it with another adult. Make sure that your child is making eye contact. Make sure that when they are speaking, they're not sitting there doing this with their hands or looking out the window, scratching their hair. None of that. So in kind of the techniques that I teach, I go for a nice clasped loose hand straight in the lap. If you really have a fidgety child, then you can slightly tuck under the legs. Both feet flat on the floor is always good because it stops the wobbly foot. Talk about the school, talk about the achievements, practice those questions. If your child is going for multiple schools, please make sure they have a unique reason as to why they want to go to that school in particular. Because every year I probably do between 20 and 30 one-to-one interviews. And that's not including the school stuff, that's just online. And I hear over and over again, I want to go to this school because it is a highly academic school. That's one. Because it's got great science labs. And it doesn't matter which school they're talking about, it's always the same. And sometimes students get confused between which school it is as well. Oh, was that school? You want to be there, and they want to know that the school wants to know that you are really considering them. So come up with something that is unique, that is interesting, that really took your eye. If you went on an open day, tell them you went on an open day and what you saw. If they've got a club that you haven't found anywhere else, tell them that. So make sure that you have got that lovely reason for multiple schools. And then if you're watching this on replay, because I know that some of you will be, the night before, pop out school uniform, especially if they've asked for uniform. If they haven't, it is up to your child, but I would always go more formal. So school uniform is always a good one to go for. Sometimes some independent schools ask you to bring something that you are proud of. If they don't ask you to bring it, ask them to think about it, because they sometimes ask it as a question. If they're saying to bring something, I bring it like in a box so that you don't have to worry about it getting lost. Because there's if they're bringing a photo, or they're bringing a certificate, or they're bringing something that they've made, a piece of art, then you don't want to worry about it being squashed or being lost. So put it in a Tupperware, just literally put it in a box, and make sure that you watch the school YouTube, because that is where they highlight their values, and that is where your child is wanting to get excited about what the school involves and about the best bits of the school. And if they can turn around in the interview and go, oh, I watched your YouTube and I saw this student who was doing abseiling and I thought that looked really fun, then that's a brilliant thing to mention to the school, because it shows that you're interested. It shows that you are aware. And then day of is about being confident. And that's why I'd always say start early, especially if your child is a little bit more shy. You know that you're going to need this preparation over time. I would always say start a little bit earlier. Make sure that they have a nice handshake. It's not necessity, but I like it. Eye contact, smiling, being aware of their surroundings. Think about talking to a head teacher. That's the kind of attitude that you want a child to go in with. Sometimes there are some harder bits. So enthusiasm, for example, it's pretty hard to fake. So make sure that your child wants to go to the school. And if they don't, if that has been a decision that's been yours and they have been okay with that and they're happy with that, find something that means that they want to go to that school, because it's really hard for them to be enthusiastic about something that they're not enthusiastic about. So find that thing. Don't fib, because you will get found out. As I said, with the movement, like make sure that they can sit still. You've got no foot tapping, you've got no chair swinging, although often they'll give them a standard chair, but don't rock back on the chair. And then one of the things that we work on is how to get past a silence. So if they ask a question that you don't know the answer to, how do you get past that silence? What can you say? Have that kind of stock phrase, that idea in your mind. Oh, I'm really sorry, I didn't understand that question. Or I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear that. Can you rephrase it for me? Or no, I'm sorry, I don't know what you're asking. I don't understand the question. Those types of things, making sure that your child knows that that is okay to say, that they can say that, rather than just sitting there and panicking. So have a way that they can start to work through tricky questions. Now, obviously, I'm coming in here and I run interview practice, but I am also a big fan of parents doing this themselves. And I think there are lots of resources around you to help you with this, especially with the early stage stuff. Newspapers, for example, one of the big things that often schools like to talk about is areas of interest. So areas that students have found interesting in the news, things that students have found interesting that they've read. So your newspapers and books. Take a trip to the library. Take a trip around a local museum and find something of interest. I work with Calvin, who runs Kid Coach app. They've got some great questions on there that is worth checking out, because they've got some good kind of tell me an example type questions. Obviously, there are masterclasses out there like mine, which go through all the different types of interview questions, how to answer them, ideal answers, and then help kind of know how to a child to word it. As I said before, don't be afraid to use other children's parents. If they know that you're applying for a similar school, then swap into a practice. Especially if you don't know that child very well, it can be a really useful practice. If you know you've got academic interviews coming up, if you know that, then verbal questions. So in the supermarket, oh, I've got to buy 2 oranges and 1 banana. How much is that going to cost me? That type of question in math. If I've got the product of 12 and 13, what would it be? Those types of things for math. For the English, grab a poem. Get a book out the library that is a poetry collection, open it up, and then ask them some questions about it. What does this word mean? What do you think this poem is all about? Why do you think that? What do you think is happening here? Why do you think they've used that word? That's the type of thing that we're interested in. And really, there is no real, there are obviously answers that are correct, but in an interview, especially an academic interview, they're interested in how a student thinks more than do they know the answer. So always discursive, not no, this isn't right. We're looking at, oh, that's interesting. Can you tell me why you think that? So when we're asking those interviews, when I'm doing those interviews in schools, I'm never saying to a child, no, that's just not right. Instead, I'm asking them why they think that, because I want to see why. I want to see, is that a child that the interviewer knows that they can teach, or they know that they would be a good fit for the school. So they know that they're able to argue their reasoning behind something. And if they realize their reasoning isn't right, they're going to change their mind. So academic interviews can be tested by, you can practice them, by asking those verbal questions in day-to-day. And as I said earlier, I will drop in probably tomorrow. I'll drop into the comments a link so that you can fill in some details and get some more information and some infographics and some interview questions from me, so that is there. All right. I think I've rushed through and clearly am ready for the end of the day. But if you are interested, you interested in what the Education Hotel offers, obviously, as I said, we run an interview masterclass. It's the 4th time that we've run it. And it comes with this big booklet on preparation. We do one-to-one prep. We do in-class prep as well for any teachers out there. The big thing, though, I think, is being aware of how to start that preparation. So all of those resources around you, all of those ways that you can practice, and that will introduce your child to interviews. So do kind of sit there, do go back through this if it's of use. I hope it was of use, and do let me know if you've got any further questions. At the end of this, of course, I again want to say thank you to Saba and to the 11 Plus Journey. The Facebook group is hopefully a supportive place, a place that we can answer questions to do with the 11 Plus. And part of that 11 Plus is, for some students, interviews. If you do have an interview question, you can always tag me on it, and I will come along and I will try and answer it as best I can. And if you do have questions, stick them down into the comments. And I know that I'd love to see any questions that you've got. So thanks ever so much if you're watching live. If you're watching this on replay, let me know. Give me a hashtag replay. And thanks ever so much. All right then. Bye-bye.